They sat across from me, like I was a stranger. My own parents. And then my mother said it flat. Final. Like it meant nothing. We no longer have a daughter. The lawyer looked uncomfortable. I didn't cry. I didn't even blink. Because I knew something they didn't. While they were busy erasing me from their lives, they forgot one thing. The trust fund, it was never in their name. It was in mine, since I was 12. My name is Emily Gardner. And this is the story of how my parents disowned me, and how I let them. I used to believe family meant something, some invisible bond that would never break, no matter how strained or silent things got. But what I didn't realize back then was that bonds don't break. People do. I grew up in Wilmington, North Carolina, in a big white house that looked perfect on the outside. Big porch, blue shutters, rose bushes my mother never watered. To anyone driving by, we were the picture of Southern grace. But inside, it was quiet. Not the comforting kind of quiet. The kind that hums with judgment. The kind that makes you second-guess every word out of your mouth. My parents, Thomas and Diana Gardner, had high expectations, ones I never quite met. My mother was a former debutante turned real estate agent. My father was a finance consultant who always wore the same gray suit and the same cold stare. I was their only child. Not by design, just by circumstance. And if I'm honest, I think they always resented me for existing in the first place. They liked order, clean lines, predictable outcomes, and I was anything but. I liked drawing, painting, rearranging my room at 2 a.m. I wasn't wild, just different. But in their eyes, different meant defective. I remember the first time I overheard my mother say it. I was 14. She was on the phone with her sister, in the kitchen. "She's exhausting," she said, "like an emotional liability." I stood on the stairs, frozen. That word echoed liability, like I was a burden, an error on their perfect spreadsheet of life. From that moment on, I learned to shrink, to speak less, to smile when I didn't mean it, to never cry where they could see. By the time I was 24, I had moved out. I was working as a freelance graphic designer and living in a modest one-bedroom rental a few miles away. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. Then came the day that changed everything. It was a Thursday afternoon when I got the call. My mother's voice, clipped and businesslike. "We're having a family meeting tomorrow. Be at the house by noon." No explanation, no warmth, just a command. I should have known something was off. But part of me still hoped maybe, just maybe, they were ready to see me. Really see me. I arrived the next day wearing a navy dress I hadn't worn since college graduation. I stood on that familiar porch, the paint now chipped, the roses dead. I knocked once and let myself in. Everyone was already gathered in the dining room. My father at the head of the table, my mother beside him, lips pursed, and across from them, a man I barely recognized. "Emily," my father said, "sit." I obeyed, silently. "This is Charles Davenport," he continued. "Our attorney." My stomach tightened. My eyes darted to the papers laid neatly on the table. Legal documents, notebooks, a folder with my name on it. "Is someone sick?" I asked. My mother exhaled like I was being dramatic. "We're restructuring the estate," she said, "making some necessary changes." I looked at the stranger Charles and he cleared his throat. "Emily, per your parents' directive, today's meeting is to formally revise the Gardner family trust." I blinked. "I don't understand." My father slid a document toward me. It was typed, neatly formatted. With one bolded sentence halfway down the page, "Emily Gardner shall be removed as a beneficiary. Effective immediately." My mouth opened. No sound came out. "This isn't a decision we made lightly," my mother added, feigning some false pain, "but you've always struggled to meet expectations." I stared at them. My own parents, erasing me like a typo. "We're transferring primary inheritance rights to Logan," my father said. "Logan, my cousin, the golden boy from Yale. He's more aligned with the legacy of this family," my mother said. I didn't cry, I didn't argue, because right then, something inside me shattered so quietly, no one noticed. I stood, nodded, walked out without a word. Outside, the sun was too bright, the air too warm. I got in my car, drove away, and let the silence swallow me whole. That was the day I disappeared from their world. And it was the day I began remembering exactly what they had forgotten. The day after they disowned me, I didn't get out of bed. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling fan spin like time itself was mocking me. My phone buzzed once Logan's name. I didn't answer. I didn't need to hear the congratulations in his voice, or the false concern. I knew the truth they picked him, not because he was better, but because he was easy. That morning, I replayed everything in my head. The lawyer, the document, my mother's voice so calm, so rehearsed like she'd been waiting for this moment, and the way my father refused to meet my eyes. It wasn't sudden. That's the thing. It never is. This kind of betrayal builds slowly, like mold behind a wall, quiet, hidden, until one day, the entire structure crumbles. I didn't cry. Tears felt like a gift they didn't deserve. Instead, I did something they never expected. I got up. I pulled the old lockbox from the closet, the one my grandfather gave me when I was 12. It still smelled like cedar. Still had the tiny brass key taped to the bottom. I opened it, and inside was the original trust agreement. His handwriting was there, slanted, neat, purposeful. To Emily, because I see you, even if they don't. My chest tightened. That man. He was the only one who ever looked me in the eye and called me brilliant. He used to sneak me sketchbooks and colored pencils when my mother complained about the mess. He was the only person in our family who valued expression over obedience. He died when I was 16, at his funeral. I remember crying so hard my vision blurred, and my mother leaned over and whispered, "Pull yourself together. People are watching." Now, nearly a decade later, I was holding the last piece of him, and buried in that document was a detail they had forgotten. The Gardner family trust had two branches, one controlled by my parents, the other sealed, untouched, and legally assigned to me. $2.3 million, set aside for future investment, education, or home ownership, as per his original stipulation, transferable only on or after my 25th birthday. And that was in 3 days. 3 days. They had spent so much time rewriting their legacy, they forgot the one thing he built was meant to bypass them completely. I stared at the numbers, at the legal notations, at the seal from the bank in Charlotte. And for the first time since that awful dinner, I smiled. Not out of revenge, out of clarity, because this wasn't just about money. This was about power, about control. And they had just handed it to me without realizing. Over the next 2 days, I worked in silence. I found a lawyer named Janine Kaufman, sharp, brilliant, and known for dealing with interfamily estate battles. I told her everything, showed her every paper, every document. She didn't flinch. "This was airtight," she said, flipping through the trust agreement. He knew what he was doing. I nodded. "I want to activate it," I said. She smiled. "On your 25th birthday, we'll file..." She paused. "And Emily..." "Yes. You don't have to tell them. Not yet." That night, I walked past the Gardner estate. Just walked quietly. The porch light was on. Logan's BMW was in the driveway. Laughter floated through the windows, wine glasses clinking, my mother's voice praising his new job, my father's low chuckle. I stood there for a long time. Not bitter, not jealous. Just done. 3 days later, I signed the papers. Janine filed everything, and within hours, the transfer was complete. The bank account was opened. The trust officially under my full control. $2.3 million. No oversight. No approval needed. I took a deep breath. And then I got to work. Logan had moved into my grandfather's old property, the red brick townhouse in downtown Wilmington. It used to belong to the family, but my parents had sold it years ago to a private developer to fund their lifestyle expansion. What they didn't know was that the developer had gone bankrupt, and the property was in foreclosure. I made a phone call. Quiet. Direct. 2 weeks later, the deed was mine. I didn't evict Logan immediately. That would have been too easy. Instead, I waited. Waited until the annual Gardner Foundation Gala, the one my mother chaired every spring. The one where Logan would be introduced as the new face of the family legacy. I arrived late. Wearing black. No invite. Just presents. Heads turned. I walked in slowly, deliberately, and stopped right in front of the donor wall where my grandfather's name was etched in gold. My father's jaw clenched. My mother's eyes narrowed. "Emily," she said, a forced smile stretching her lips. "This is a private event." I looked at her, then at Logan, and then I handed her an envelope. Inside, a notice of transfer, of ownership. The townhouse Logan lived in, no longer his. Not theirs, mine. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't stay long. I turned around and walked out. And this time, they didn't stop me. They couldn't, because the thing they had thrown away was the very thing that now held the keys to their past, to their name, to everything they thought they owned. The morning after the gala, my phone lit up with calls I didn't answer. Voicemails poured in from my father, my mother, even Logan. At first, they sounded angry, then confused, then desperate. "Emily, this is your father. We need to talk." Talk. Now they wanted to talk? I ignored every message, because for the first time in my life, I had nothing to explain. That night, I sat on the floor of my apartment with a glass of wine and every piece of paper my grandfather had ever given me. His letters, notes scribbled in the margins of trust amendments, sketches he made of the old house before it was remodeled, memories etched in ink. He had always known they would come for the name, but he made sure the legacy would find its way to the one person who never asked for it, but who'd honor it. Me. The week that followed was a storm of silence on my end and chaos on theirs. I heard through an old friend that my mother canceled 2 foundation luncheons, and my father was seen arguing with a bank manager downtown. Logan moved out of the townhouse quietly. He didn't call me. He didn't dare. But what none of them knew was that I wasn't done. The townhouse was only the beginning. I had spent my entire life watching them build their image polished, perfect, curated for donors and dinner parties. My mother once told me, perception is power. She was right. And now I had the power to reshape the perception. I contacted Janine again. "There's something else," I said. She raised an eyebrow. "Go on." I handed her the file, an original copy of my grandfather's shares in Gardner Holdings, a shell company they used to route property sales through during the 2000s. Buried deep in the transfer agreements, my name was listed not as a shareholder, but as a trustee. If we could prove that those funds had been misused, funneled into personal purchases under the guise of business expansion, then a case could be made to freeze those assets. Janine leaned back in her chair, impressed. "This is surgical," she said. I nodded. "It's not about revenge," I said. "It's about truth, about ending the performance." Within 2 weeks, Janine filed a motion to review Gardner Holdings transactions. It wasn't a lawsuit, not yet, but it sent a clear message. I wasn't going away, and I wasn't a liability. I was the owner of the foundation they thought they controlled. Their lawyer reached out, offered a meeting. I declined. Instead, I made my next move. There was a property, the old lakeside retreat my grandfather used to take me to when I was little. They had sold it years ago to fund renovations on the estate's ballroom. But the new owners had defaulted on taxes. It was back on the market. I bought it, not because I needed it, but because it was mine, because he would have wanted me to have it, and because they didn't deserve to erase every trace of what made him human. I restored the cabin with care, left the creaky floors, repainted the porch railing in the same faded blue, hung his fishing hat by the door. I invited no one. It became my sanctuary, a place to breathe, to remember that love doesn't come with conditions. That legacy isn't inherited, it's earned. Months passed. Spring turned to summer, and then one Sunday afternoon I got a letter, handwritten, from my mother. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even signed with love. It read, "Emily, we didn't expect you to understand our decisions, but your behavior has forced consequences neither of us wanted. You've always been too emotional, too reactive, but this, what you're doing, it's vindictive. You've embarrassed us. I hope you find peace in whatever path you've chosen. Diana Gardner." I folded the letter once, then again, then dropped it into the fireplace. I didn't need peace from them, because I had found something better. Control, silence, freedom, and then came the final twist, one I hadn't planned. A reporter local, quiet, kind, reached out to me, said she was doing a piece on the Gardner family's charitable foundation. Wanted my input. I hesitated. But eventually, I met her, told her my version. Not the angry version, not the tabloid drama, just the facts. About my grandfather, about the trust, about the silent war no one saw coming. The article was published 2 weeks later, titled The Forgotten Gardner. My photo wasn't on the cover, but my words were, and that was enough. Because now, the truth was out there. Not screamed, not weaponized, just planted, like a seed. And I knew it would grow. Because the one thing my parents never understood, never could control, was that legacy doesn't come from what you keep. It comes from what you protect. And I was done protecting them. By the time the article went public, I had already stopped checking their reactions. I didn't need to, because silence can be louder than any scream. The Gardner name, once wrapped in gold and gala invitations, began to fray at the edges, quietly, elegantly, like an old ribbon coming undone. The article didn't accuse, it revealed, it didn't humiliate, it illuminated. And in that softness, it cut deeper than anything I could have shouted. Because truth doesn't need volume. It only needs to be seen. I walked through Wilmington that week with a stillness I hadn't known before. People didn't stop me, but they looked twice, not out of pity, not even curiosity. Recognition. For the first time, I wasn't Thomas and Diana's daughter. I was Emily. Just Emily. And I was enough. One afternoon, as I was locking up the lakeside cabin, my phone buzzed. A name I hadn't seen in years. Elena Graves, my grandfather's old legal assistant. We'd exchanged a few letters after he passed. She had retired early, moved to Chapel Hill. I answered. Elena. Emily, she said. I read the article. Her voice trembled not with weakness, but weight. I have something for you. I should have sent it sooner. I met her 2 days later at a diner off the highway. She looked older, but still sharp, still elegant in that no-nonsense way. She slid a sealed envelope across the table. Your grandfather gave me this a month before he died. She said to only hand it to you if the family ever turned against you. My fingers trembled as I broke the wax seal. Inside was a letter, short, direct, and devastatingly clear. Emily, if you're reading this, then they've done exactly what I feared they might. Don't let them rewrite the story. The estate was never the prize. You are... Love. Pop. Beneath the letter, a key. Small, iron, ornate. Attached to a note that said simply, Charleston. Elena smiled gently. There's a safety deposit box, she said. He kept it under a different name. You'll need to go there yourself. The next day, I drove 3 hours in silence. Not the kind of silence that screams. The kind that listens, that heals. The bank manager in Charleston was young, polite, clearly surprised by the key. But the box? The box changed everything. Inside was a thick stack of handwritten journals. All my grandfather's letters, blueprints, land deeds, shareholder agreements, and one file that stopped my breath, a full ownership record of Gardner & Co., real estate holdings. Transferred into an anonymous trust 10 years ago. A trust bearing my initials. He had planned it all. While my parents were busy posturing, performing, he had built a quiet empire around the only person he believed in. Me. I returned to Wilmington that night with a different heart. Not cold, just clear. I called Janine first thing the next morning. I need you to activate another trust, I said. She didn't even ask why. Within a week, I was the silent majority stakeholder of Gardner & Co. And they had no idea, because I didn't show up with a press release. I showed up with paperwork. One afternoon, I walked into their corporate office, yes, there, wearing a blazer I'd bought at a thrift store. Receptionist blinked twice. Can I help you? Tell Diana Gardner her new managing partner would like a word. The silence in that lobby was delicious. My mother appeared 5 minutes later, wrapped in white linen and confusion. Emily. I handed her the folder. She opened it, paused. Read the signatures. Saw the bank seal, and I watched the color drain from her face. You can't... I already did. Why? She looked smaller now. Not broken, but cornered. For once, I said softly, I wanted to walk into a room you built and know I belonged. She didn't cry. Neither did I. Because this wasn't a victory lap. It was restoration. Of a name. Of a story. Of a girl they tried to erase. I didn't fire her. Didn't dismantle what she'd built. But I took my seat at the table. And that was enough. Later that evening, I sat alone in the office that once belonged to my grandfather. The room still smelled like cedar. I opened the drawer. Found an old photo of us, me, age 8, covered in marker ink, holding up a lopsided drawing. He was smiling, proud. I placed it on the desk, not as a trophy, as a compass, to remind myself where this all began and who I had always been. Even when they refused to see it, especially then, there's a quiet kind of victory that doesn't look like fireworks. It looks like walking into a boardroom, unannounced, and knowing no one can stop you. It looks like silence in your inbox where there used to be orders. It looks like your name unchallenged on the top of a letterhead they thought would never be yours. That's what the final months looked like. Not revenge. Reclamation. I didn't need them to apologize. I didn't want them to, because some stories are better ended without a closing line. After the takeover of Gardner and Co., things changed. Slowly. My mother stopped showing up to meetings. She claimed health reasons, but we both knew it was pride. My father never spoke to me directly again, and Logan, he disappeared from the city altogether. Word was he'd taken a job out west, or maybe he just couldn't bear to watch the girl they erased become the woman who now owned everything. The public didn't need to know the details. I let the foundation continue, let the businesses run, but I rewrote the mission statements, redirected the funds. Every building my grandfather helped construct had his real story displayed. No more curated portraits. No more rewritten bloodlines. Truth. One plaque simply read, "In memory of the man who saw worth where others saw waste." That was enough. One afternoon, I returned to the old family estate. It had sat untouched for months, dust gathering in corners, chandeliers dulled, silence stretching through the hallways like a ghost. I walked through every room. The dining hall where they disowned me, the staircase I used to sit on as a child, listening to their parties downstairs, the study where my father hid behind newspapers. I stopped in what used to be my bedroom. Empty now. Except for one thing, a single box pushed against the wall. I opened it. Inside were old drawings. Mine, crumpled, yellowed, but unmistakable. My name scrawled in the corners. A note, barely legible, too messy. Throw away. It was my mother's handwriting? I should have felt rage. I didn't. I felt release. I left the house without taking anything, because I no longer needed to carry proof. I was the proof. The estate went on the market that spring, sold quietly to a historical preservation group. I donated every cent of the sale to an art scholarship fund under my grandfather's name. It was never about the money. It was about telling the truth and letting it live on. Months passed. Summer turned to fall. And one morning, I received a letter. No return address. Inside a photo. It was me and my grandfather at the lakeside cabin. He was pointing at the water. I was laughing. On the back, in faded ink, it said you were always meant to lead. There was no signature, but I didn't need one. I framed it and placed it in my office, right beside the new company mission statement, to create what outlives us. That's what legacy means. Not what you take, but what you leave. I don't know where my parents are now. I don't ask. I don't check. Because there's a difference between forgiveness and forgetting. I forgave them for myself, but I'll never forget, not because I'm bitter, but because remembering made me strong. Remembering built the road I now walk on, one paved with every silence I survived. Every dinner I was excluded from, every time they called me too much, too soft, too inconvenient. Now I walk into rooms with nothing to prove, because I already did, not by shouting, not by tearing down, but by building, by becoming, by enduring. So if you ever feel like you're being erased, remember this. They can take your seat at the table, but they cannot take the fire that taught you to build your own. And when you do, make sure it has your name carved into every corner, so the world never forgets who they tried to silence, and how loud you became in your silence,